Today we are going to talk about a particular topic in social psychology which is called as prosocial behavior and which is very much apt to whatever is happening now. Especially during this pandemic, we have seen lot of prosocial behavior here, and in our society also we have seen so many people helping each other. So today we are going to talk about that particular topic. So the main objectives of this lesson are to understand what exactly is prosocial behavior, to know the difference between prosocial behavior and altruism, and in this context we are also going to discuss what exactly is an empathy-altruism hypothesis, and we are also going to describe the concept of bystander effect, and then we are also going to discuss what exactly is an implicit bystander effect. Prosocial behavior is a helpful action that usually benefits the other person without providing any direct benefits to the person who is actually involved in the act. It may even involve the risk for the person who helps. For example, if you are in a search of an address in a particular road and get lost, then someone in the crowd offers help. This usually happens to us, isn't it? So some people provide assistance to each other, but sometimes when we observe in day-to-day life, they usually do not. The combination of sacrifices and satisfaction underlying prosocial act holds very much true whether the behavior is something simple and safe or something which is complicated and dangerous. Hence, many social psychologists' goal is to understand and predict prosocial behavior, which in turn acts or benefits others. The assistance given by people, the mixture of sacrifice and satisfaction underlying prosocial act holds true whether the behavior is something relatively safe and simple, such as helping anyone to find a route or saving someone from an accident, etc. There is a lot of research indicates that whether a person decides to help or not, or help a stranger, it depends on many factors which actually contribute to it, such as situational factors, the state of mind of the person, the time, and their personality traits too. The behavior which involves prosocial act include activities such as sharing, comforting, rescuing, and helping. It is very complex behavior which is actually influenced by numerous factors in terms of their biological, environmental factors. There have been several studies on twins also, which actually support that heredity plays an important role, and it is seen mostly in the identical twins, which are more similar to each other in terms of prosocial behavior, and as well as sympathetic when compared to fraternal twins, who actually share 50% of their genes, where heredity affects aspects of their temperament such as their self-regulation, emotionality, and agreeableness, which actually contribute to people engaging in higher levels of prosocial behavior. It is also seen that the differences in individual in prosocial behavior are also linked to socialization processes, such as some people are more likely to help others if they as children seen their parents or near and dear ones performing the prosocial act. So now we have seen a little bit introduction about prosocial behavior. Now we will see how exactly this prosocial behavior came into being, or the historical background to prosocial behavior. There has been evidence that voluntary actions which benefits others are strongly linked to human behavior. In 1970s, a biologist named Edward Wilson began a new field which is called as sociobiology, where they studied the social behaviors of animals and humans which are motivated biologically. Through books and articles stated and mentioned examples of helping within many animals and insect species, and in his work he also told that helping and rescuing behaviors are very much innate in primates. Hence, with this, many development psychologists and other social scientists point to animal world as proof that prosocial behavior is a programmed biological function of humanity rather than only nurtured or actions which have been learned. Considering our history too, there are many examples of humans who have engaged in helping behavior. For example, in northwestern Indian potlatch practice, it was seen that the guests were invited to the event and were given gifts by the host in accordance to the guest's position in the community. So, such type of prosocial traditions or life attitudes are also found throughout time and the world. But the term prosocial behavior has been used only since 1970s. Social scientists firstly started using this term as an antonym to antisocial behavior. However, in 1960s, the significance of helping behavior and their psychological motivations have become an interest in the world. The civil rights movements and the murder of 𝗳𝗏, which we are going to discuss, captivated the nation's attention and raised questions of why people engage and not engage in prosocial behavior. And this compelled social psychologists to study the psychological motivations that drive helping and sharing. Now we will know what is the importance of prosocial behavior. We as human beings are part of a group, and as individuals too, we are often tend to help others who are in need or distress. If we see the charities and societies, they depend on people helping one another. For example, in the recent times of pandemic, we have seen several individuals and organizations who have come forward to offer help to others as a prosocial behavior, and also benefits maintaining the positive social relationships and promoting social adjustment. According to Eisenberg, it is a behavior which benefits others, which includes helping, cooperating, comforting, sharing and donating. When we see everyday context, we observe that some people are more prosocial than others. It is seen that prosocial children and adults seem to be more prone to sympathize with others. They are more likely to understand others' thoughts and feelings and try to take others' perspectives. It is seen that children who are prosocial often tend to be positive in their emotional expression, socially competent and well adjusted, and as well as well regulated. And they also have a positive self concept in terms of their childhood and adulthood. People who reason about more conflicts in more mature ways are most likely than their peers to help others. Now we will see what is prosocial behavior and altruism. Many people often use the term prosocial behavior and altruism interchangeably, with giving, sharing, cooperating. Social psychologist theories often distinguish between prosocial behavior and altruism. Altruism is one of the aspects of prosocial behavior which refers to any action that usually benefits other people without any regard to what the motive or how the giver benefits from the action. Whereas altruism involves selflessness as a motive, which means that all the altruistic acts that people indulge in are prosocial in nature, but not all prosocial behaviors are completely altruistic. Altruism is the behavior that is motivated by an unselfish concern for the welfare of others. It is the behavior intended to benefit others even when this particular action risks possible sacrifice to the welfare of the person. Example of altruism can be that if an individual makes an anonymous donation to a person, group or an institution without any resulting in recognition or any sort of political or economic gain. Here in this context, we can understand that donation is prosocial act and the altruism is what motivates the person to do such action. Some of the important aspects of altruism are: the first one is altruism must entail action that is good intentions or well-meaning thoughts. The action should be goal-directed and this can be conscious or reflexive. If another person's welfare is merely unintended or secondary consequence of behavior and primarily to further the actor's own welfare, then it is not altruistic. The next one is intentions are more important than the consequence in the altruism. Then in altruism, motivations and intent are very important. Now we will see what exactly is empathy altruism hypothesis. Empathetic concern refers to emotion which is elicited by a person incongruent with the perceived welfare of someone in need, which can be referred to as compassion, sympathy, tenderness, etc. And altruism is a motivational state with the ultimate goal of increasing another's welfare. For many years, there was a long-standing debate whether humans possess the capacity for altruism. For many centuries, it was seen that all human behavior, which includes helping others, is egoistically motivated. But some researchers also questioned whether all the human behavior is motivated by self-interest, and some have also suggested that people may help others because they feel empathetic for another person's welfare, which may lead to particular altruism. So, in this diagram, if you see, the first thing, when you observe someone in need of help, if you feel empathy for that person, then you will help regardless of whether it is in your self-interest to do so. That means here, when it is there, even the costs are more than rewards, you help that person. Suppose in another scenario, if you see here, if they do not feel empathy, that is no, then you will not, you will help the person only if it is in your self-interest. That means here you see rewards more than that of the cost. So, this is how empathy altruism hypothesis work. Altruism and egoism have a lot in common, and each of it refers to a motivated state where the end goal is to increase someone's welfare. But whose welfare is the ultimate goal, whether it is his or her goal or others? In altruistic motivation, it plays a significant role where it can be discussed in the following lines. The first one is in helping behavior. Many of the scholars have kept aside the term motivation and equated altruism with helping behavior without motivation. It is most common among the development psychologists and evolutionary biologists. However, Sober and Wilson have differentiated among evolutionary altruism, which says that it is the behavior that reduces one's reproductive fitness, and on other side psychological altruism, which is again a motivation with ultimate goal of increasing another's welfare. There is no necessary connection between the two concepts. Evolution and altruism is neither necessary nor sufficient to produce psychological altruism. The second, the term altruism focuses on a particular skill set of helpful acts which meets some standard of goodness or morality. The link between altruism and morality appears to be based on self-interest, and self-interest sometimes equates itself selflessness, which in turn considered to be the epitome of immortality, and altruism involves others' interest rather than the self-interest. Altruistic motivation does produce behavior which depends on moral standard applied, that is, which is moral or immoral, or on similar lines of egoistic motivation, which can produce behavior which is more or not moral. The third, helping to gain internal rather than external rewards. Another use of altruism considers motivating which benefits others. Instead of treating altruistic motivation as an alternative to egoistic motivation, altruism could be reduced to special form of egoism. According to it, if you help to feel good, to avoid guilt, then your motivation to help is altruistic. Now, we will understand what we mean by bystander effect. Whenever there is any emergency, we often hear many tell us that they received help from strangers, and at the same time we also hear that some of them did not do nothing about it. It is also quite natural for people to freeze or go into shock in those situations when seeing someone having an emergency or being attacked. This is usually a response to fear, or that you might be misunderstanding the context, and several other factors can also contribute to it. And these kinds of situations happen in our day-to-day life. Bystander effect refers to the fact that the likelihood of a prosocial response to an emergency is affected by the number of bystanders who are present. And it is a theory which states that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when there are other people who are present. Psychologists' interest in prosocial behavior began when bystanders did not help a stranger in a distress or an emergency. This particular event was a murder which took place in 1960s in the New York City. Catherine Genovese was working as a manager for a bar. She was crossing the street to her apartment building, and she was approached by a man holding a knife. Miss Genovese ran, but the murderer chased after her until he was very close enough to stab her. She screamed for help. All the lights in the apartments nearby went on, and many of them overlooked the scene. Many of them looked out and tried to determine what was happening. At this point, the attacker started to leap, but when he saw that no one was coming to help the particular victim, he returned and finished his work. This shook everyone and raised many questions. It was found out that the attack was witnessed by 38 residents of apartment building, but none of them went out to help or call the police. And this particular incident made way to lot of research on the particular bystanders. The two main factors play an important role in bystander effect. One is the diffusion of responsibility, and other is our desire to confirm and follow actions of others, and if no one else does anything, it is easier to feel that it is not necessary or appropriate to take action. Darley and Latney proposed a different and an apparent reason for unresponsiveness of the bystanders, but instead increasing the odds that prosocial behavior will occur. They said that having multiple bystanders will decrease the odds. In their groundbreaking experiment on inhibiting effect of multiple bystanders was studied. An experiment was done. College students were deliberately exposed to an emergency in which there seemed to be usually a medical emergency, and the fellow student called for help. Every research participant believed himself to be either the only bystander aware of the emergency, but one of the two bystanders or one of the five. In this experiment, the helplessness was measured in terms of, first one is percentage of participants in each experimental group who attempted to help. The second, the time that passed before the help began. Many large number of witnesses experienced what we call it as diffusion of responsibility, which means that the more bystanders that are present, the less responsibility any of them feels dealing with situation. If the idea is correct, in a situation with only one bystander, help is very likely given because all the responsibility is centered on one individual. As the bystanders increases, each one has a smaller and smaller share of responsibility and less likely anyone to help. If the witnesses are in a group, they usually think that others will take action, and the more witnesses are there, it is that anyone will act, and thus individual responsibility becomes group responsibility. Being a part of group usually reduces one's sense of prosocial responsibility. In this state, people are more likely to do things they would never do individually, and this happens when they fear that personal harm is too great, or feeling that one does not have skill, or assuming that others are much better qualified to help, or can be fear of becoming the target of aggression or bullying in other way. Hence, as the number of bystanders increased, the percentage of individuals who tried to help the victim decreased. In addition, among these who did attempt to help, the more bystanders, the greater the delay before help was initiated, and then conclude that no intervention is necessarily when help is actually needed, which we call it as pluralistic ignorance. And when people use the inactions of others to define their own course of action, so the resulting pluralistic ignorance may lead to less help being given. In terms of emergencies and everyday situations, some of these studies show importance of helpers which plays in a social situation where events which are not fortunate to occur, and other provide important social information about how we should act and what our personal obligations might be. There is another concept which we call it as implicit bystander effect. Implicit bystander effect shows that people do not always help in emergency situations. The likelihood of each person helping will decrease as the physical presence of other people increases. For example, being in a group leads one to feel as if one is less responsible for helping and taking action, and this feeling of less responsibility leads to inaction. Over the years, much of research on prosocial behavior was identified, and many additional factors that determine how people respond to an emergency was seen. but the bystander effect is clearly an important basic discovery. When a situation of helping comes, people may search for the internal cues to decide whether they should help or not. Such findings again indicate that diffusion of responsibility, which can be triggered not only by the presence of others but also by cognitive processes, thus constituting an implicit bystander effect. Hence, implicit bystander effect refers to the decrease in helping behavior brought about by simply thinking about being in a particular group. There are a lot of interplay of so many things in terms of his or her motivation to help, and if the help is altruistic in nature or it is because of self interest the person is helping, during this process also the bystander effect, which is again influenced by pluralistic ignorance, diffusion of responsibility, play an important role for a foolproof pro-social behavior act. We will see what is the summary of it. Pro-social behavior is a helpful behavior which benefits others when an emergency arises and someone is in need of help. The person who is witnessing the situation may or may not respond, and in some situation we find some people who take risk and provide help. Hence, pro-social behavior is an helpful action that benefits other people without necessarily providing any direct benefits to the person performing the act, and which sometimes involves risk for the person who helps. In this context, sometimes the term altruism is used interchangeably with that of pro-social behavior. If you see altruism, it is the behavior that is motivated by an unselfish concern for the welfare of others. Then we also talked about empathy altruism hypothesis, which usually explains that we help someone depending upon how much we feel empathetic towards the person, and if we do not feel empathetic towards anyone, we tend not to help. There is another factor which also helps influences pro-social behavior, which we call it as bystander effect, which means the fact that the likelihood of a pro-social response to an emergency, which is again affected by the number of bystanders who are present.